Afternoon. Welcome to Preservation Connecticut's Spring 2025 series talking about preservation, our noontime chats about everything preservation. I'm Jane Montanaro, Executive Director of Preservation Connecticut, and I'm pleased to be your host. Today, we are talking about 50 years of Preservation Connecticut historic resources. An anniversary edition of our program talking about preservation, and the conversation will be led by Christopher Wiegren, our Deputy Director. Next slide, please. So Preservation Connecticut is the statewide historic preservation organization established in 1975 by a special act of the Connecticut General Assembly. And for 50 years, we have been the leading historic preservation organization in Connecticut, assisting property owners with all things to do with historic preservation. And we have a staff of 10 who are always ready to assist you with your preservation needs. And since we're going to be talking in depth about Preservation Connecticut's work, I won't go through all of our staff listed here today, but I encourage you to visit our website, preservationct.org, and reach out to any of these preservation professionals anytime you have a question about historic preservation. Next slide, please. So these noontime chats have been a wonderful way for us to connect with our audiences and continue our mission. We love having these conversations with you and are open to any suggestions for programming or topics that you'd like to discuss in the next series. So feel free to reach out during the conversation or afterwards with any suggestions. Next slide, please. And we are really grateful to our sponsors who've provided financial assistance for this programming: Neil Hawk Architects, Parker Benjamin, and Trinity Financial. Thank you very much, sponsors. And next slide. So I hope you'll join us on Saturday in person. We're going to be in Bridgeport on site at the Mary and Eliza Freeman houses in Bridgeport. We'll be talking with Maisa Tisdale and getting an update on all of the wonderful work that is happening at the site, and hopefully get a tour. So next slide. Okay. And now I can hand it over to Chris.
Thank you, Jane. So Preservation Connecticut is the statewide historic preservation nonprofit organization for Connecticut, and we've been around now for 50 years. I'm going ahead of myself. The preservation movement got started in the 19th century, especially with a big boost around 1876, as Americans celebrated the centennial of the Revolution and became much more aware of their own history and the places that were important in that history. In Connecticut, there certainly were historical organizations, but preservation formally got started in 1955 with the formation of the Connecticut Historical Commission as a state agency for preserving historic places. Harlan Griswold of Woodbury was the chair of that commission for a long time. You'll see his photograph there on the left of the screen. In 1966, the National Historic Preservation Act was founded and mandated, among other things, that every state have a state historic preservation office. So the Connecticut Historical Commission, which already existed, was designated as the State Historic Preservation Office. But as the organization grew and sort of established preservation programs through the state, Harlan Griswold and Jack Shanahan, who was the State Historic Preservation Officer, gradually became aware that there needed to be private partnership to official state actions as well. In some ways that private organizations could move more nimbly, could do things that state government couldn't do, and another way to recruit and build interest. So they gathered a group of like-minded people, and in February of 1975, had the first meeting of a board of trustees of a private nonprofit organization for historic preservation. Then they started off almost immediately lobbying the General Assembly, and the General Assembly in 1975 passed a state charter for this new organization, the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation. And that charter said, among other things, that the purpose of the organization was to stimulate citizens throughout the private sector to preserve, restore, and reuse historic, architecturally significant buildings and sites, so that present and future generations may live within and enjoy our common heritage. Governor Ella Grasso signed that act into law on July 3rd, 1975. So we think of July 3rd as our real birthday as Connecticut's statewide nonprofit preservation organization. The idea of private sector, the main model that was contemplated for the organization was it would work as a revolving fund, buy endangered properties, do renovation or repair work as needed, and then resell them to preservation-minded owners. And the first project they undertook was the Lord Tavern, which you see here in Norwich. It had been threatened with demolition to expand the parking lot of the McDonald's. A local historic district commission turned down the application to demolish the house. That was appealed all the way to the state Supreme Court, which upheld the right of the commission to prevent demolition of the house, but that didn't necessarily mean that the house was going to be preserved. The owner could have let it stand and deteriorate and fall down, demolition by neglect. So the brand new Connecticut Trust stepped in and bought the property, carried out the restoration work that you see, and turned around and sold it again. And so that took a few years, but the building is still there, as you can see. Two other early projects were Lincoln House in Waterbury, social service agency building designed by architect Cass Gilbert as part of a cluster of institutional and civic buildings in downtown Waterbury. That too had been threatened with demolition in 1978, and the trust made a grant to allow it to be renovated and continue to operate. And in 1984, we made a loan guarantee to help the Trust for Public Land by part of Weir Farm, J. Alden Weir, the Impressionist painter's farm in Wilton, that eventually became Connecticut's first national historic site. You can see the picture of the dedication there when it was finally did reach that status. The state allocated $500,000 in the 1980s for the Connecticut Trust's revolving fund to be matched by private donations. We never quite got the full match, but did raise enough to draw down part of that money and to carry out several successful projects. The Benjamin Weed House in Darien, which you see on the cover of the brochure, again, another threatened building that the Connecticut Trust bought, restored, and resold. And you can see it there as it looked right after the restoration work was done. In addition to acquiring properties, sometimes the revolving fund made loans to property owners for renovation work. The Octagon House in Bridgeport that you see on the right there is one of those properties. By the 1990s, the real estate downturn, the trust lost money on several projects, and with no new infusions of capital, the revolving fund was eventually shut down. In the 2010s, we resurrected the idea of a revolving fund, had seed money from the 1772 foundation, but very quickly decided that it was more effective to use the expertise of a professional community development fund, Capital for Change. And for several years, that fund managed loans while we helped to identify and evaluate projects. Another kind of real estate program is preservation easements. These are private agreements with owners who promise to maintain their historic properties and give the Connecticut Trust, or now Preservation Connecticut, the right to approve alterations. We currently hold easements on 40 properties across the state, ranging from colonial farmhouses to 19th century worker housing to 20th century commercial buildings in rural, urban, and village settings. Here are a few of them. The house in Westport on the upper left, and below it the Adam Stanton House in Clinton, the former SNET headquarters in New Haven, now converted to apartments, Elliot Noyce House, one of the pioneering modernist houses in New Canaan. Having an easement means that we become partners with the owners of these properties, giving them advice, not just telling them yes and no, really trying to help them in their lifelong stewardship of the properties. And that includes regular inspections. You can see in the lower right there, there's one of our trustees and staff members taking photographs, keeping a record of the state of the house in Woodbury over the years. In addition to real estate, Preservation Connecticut has fielded calls from property owners, community groups, municipal officials, and others seeking technical and strategic assistance. In the early 1980s, the Connecticut Trust provided information recommendations for redevelopment strategies for the city of Torrington, including facade restoration plans for commercial buildings. You see the photograph and the drawing of suggested facade improvements. In Danbury, a feasibility study that showed that it was possible and helped lead to the renovation of this historic oil mill as apartments. Since 2001, advocacy and technical assistance has largely happened through our Circuit Rider program, a program that really gets field service staff on the ground in the community, meeting with people, providing information, standing up and advocating for preservation of historic sites. This program started as a partnership with the National Trust for Historic Preservation, based on a model first developed in Vermont. And now it's funded partly and a cooperative work with the State Historic Preservation Office. The circuit riders are preservation professionals who spend a lot of their time in the field, providing advice and information, resources and strategy and technical expertise. We started off with just one circuit rider working in the Hartford area, quickly expanded to cover the whole state. And now we have 4 circuit riders, plus a circuit rider fellow, a prospective preservation professional who's learning about the work and getting ready to go to grad school. The circuit rider program has really made a big difference for Preservation Connecticut. It's raised our public awareness of our work, made us much more effective, and really gotten us out to work with people in the community. In the early 2000s, circuit riders and other staff members worked with the Historic District Commission, the property owner, and developers to avert demolition of barns owned by the Comstock Ferry Seed Company in Wethersfield. That's what you see there on the left. We provided measured drawings, information and suggestions for reuse, information about state and federal tax credits. And thanks to that, a new developer eventually bought the barns, successfully renovated them. One area where we've spent a lot of time on technical assistance is working with local historic district and property commissions. With the State Historic Preservation Office, the circuit riders provide training workshops, advice to individual commissions, and we created a handbook for commissioners, and then more recently translated that from a book to a website with information, guidance on establishing local historic districts, managing, administering them, and information for property owners as well. Our advocacy and technical assistance programs also have been active in the areas of law and legislation. Of course, that started as 1975 and getting the charter from the General Assembly to begin with. In 1979, we put on the first workshop for lobbying for historic preservation. There's a photograph from it on the left there. In 2005, Preservation Connecticut was actively involved in promoting the Community Investment Act, which took a multi-year lobbying effort along with many allies. The Community Investment Act, by levying a fee on land recordings, provides funding for historic preservation, open space acquisition, farmland preservation, and affordable housing. By setting up this dedicated fund, it creates a much more stable and predictable source of funding that helps to protect us from the vagaries of the annual appropriation process and makes it easier to plan long-range projects that land-based work, such as historic preservation programs, affordable housing, and so forth, often require planning years ahead. And that's only possible if you have some idea of what your funding is going to be. Another project was working with the city of Hartford to write its municipal preservation ordinance, the first of its kind in the state. And then based on that, we lobbied in the General Assembly for enabling legislation that allowed any municipality to have a similar ordinance to protect and encourage renovation and reuse of historic properties in ways that are best suited to each town's situation and personality. There's a good deal of flexibility in that ordinance, the enabling legislation. Preservation Connecticut has been able to offer grants for organizational preservation planning and feasibility study, community revitalization, and small restoration projects. For many years, we had historic preservation technical assistance grants, and you can see back in the age of paper nominations, the whole table full of applications received for 1 year's grants. Programs such as our barn survey included a grant program as well. On the right, there's a grant presentation to the owners of a historic barn. And for several years now, we've helped administer grants from the 1772 Foundation, a regional organization, and we administer restoration grants for them in Connecticut. Getting the word out about preservation has been an important part of our work since the beginning. We started off with a newsletter beginning in 1978 that reports on preservation activities throughout the state. Special issues have been dedicated to topics such as archaeology, landscape preservation, outdoor sculpture, African American, Native American history, and the Historic American Building Survey and the adoption of the United States Constitution. Other publications included a handbook on historic preservation law in 1984, How to Care for Your Old House, promoted as the book that should have come in the glove compartment of your historic house, and then a handbook for historic district commissions and historic property commissions that I mentioned that's now become the website. More publications, a poster for sites associated with the settlement of African Americans in Connecticut, tracing the routes of the Underground Railroad, as well as other historic sites throughout the state. And published in 2018, Connecticut Architecture, Stories of 100 Places, the first book to cover Connecticut's built environment on a statewide basis. And this was done as a project of Preservation Connecticut, specifically to help make the case for preservation, for appreciation of Connecticut's built heritage. We've also spread the word through conferences and workshops on a wide range of topics. I mentioned the lobbying conference as well. On the lower left, you see one of our House Talk programs, open houses held at historic properties for sale from all periods of Connecticut history. That's the former home of the architect Warren Plattner in Guilford. The next photograph in the sort of left second column, people sitting at a table, is a National Trust Conference early in the 1970s. Hands-on workshops like window restoration and repair, presentations on historic barns as part of our survey of barns, and a conference about the Merritt Parkway at the very beginning of our 30-odd year relationship with the Parkway. We advocated for its preservation, prepared a National Register nomination for the Parkway, and Preservation Connecticut has a permanent seat on the Merritt Parkway Advisory Committee, which continues to work with the Department of Transportation to maintain the safety and the historic appearance of the Merritt Parkway. We've also put our money where our mouth is, in the sense our own headquarters, the boarding house built for the Whitney Armory rifle factory in Hamden, which the trust bought in 1989, restored it, and continues to occupy it, but there's been ongoing stewardship, including periodic repairs and repaintings, restoration of the kitchen fireplace, which you can see on the bottom right there, and improving energy efficiency by commissioning studies and then adding insulation, storm windows, and most recently, solar panels to reduce our carbon footprint. In order to do preservation, you have to know what you have, what's out there that we want, that's important, that we want to preserve. And so to find that out, we've carried out surveys over the years. In the 1980s, surveys of New Haven's Dwight neighborhood, which led to a National Register nomination, and a survey of historic theaters that currently is being updated. In the 1990s, interest in preservation planning spurred a survey of town greens across Connecticut, which in 2001 became a website. After that, surveys of historic barns with a Barns Trail, a separate website, and for a while an app. Surveys of historic industrial sites, factories, mills, and related housing. The Making Places survey, which also had grants and technical assistance to property owners. The Creative Places survey, sites associated with artists and writers from the 20th century across the state. More recently, we helped to create to do a survey of sites listed in the Green Book, guides for African American travelers in the mid 20th century, that's been made part of a nationwide website. We also help to educate and spread awareness through our awards, holding up examples of good preservation through awards for preservation projects. In the middle there, you see the team that helped to restore some of the skylights at the state capitol. On the far left, Department of Transportation, an award for its work preserving the Merritt Parkway. With the State Historic Preservation Office, we jointly present an award named for Harlan Griswold, founder, for extraordinary contributions to preservation. The black and white photograph shows Mrs. Griswold on the right presenting the Harlan Griswold Award to Nancy Campbell, a Connecticut resident who went on to become the chair of the National Trust for Historic Preservation after chairing our board and initiating preservation activities in Middletown and at Wesleyan University. We also have another partnership award in partnership with Connecticut chapter of the American Institute of Architects, an award to honor architectural excellence in preservation work. So it's been a quick 50 years, and we're still working to strengthen our message that historic places are valuable in their own right, but also as expressions of identity, as engines of economic renewal, as resources to be conserved, as sustainable alternatives to new construction, and as catalysts for stronger communities. We've recently completed a new strategic plan, committed to making an impact, to engaging and inspiring our fellow citizens, to strengthening our organization, so that we can continue our advocacy to preserve, restore, and reuse historic and architecturally significant buildings and sites. Two of our current ongoing projects are the Washington Park project in Bridgeport. We have a $5 million grant from the state of Connecticut to carry out repairs to 7 buildings owned by 5 historic church organizations, so that they can better serve community needs through their buildings. And then on the right, a survey of sites associated with LGBTQ history in Connecticut, sites such as the home of the poet James Merrill in Stonington, which is a National Historic Landmark, but one of the very, very few sites recognized specifically for LGBTQ history in Connecticut. There are many more to be found, we're sure. So that's where we are. I can stop sharing and we can have conversation, question and answer. I know other staff members are on the call, so they can maybe share some of their stories from their work with Preservation Connecticut.
Thank you, Chris. That was a wonderful synopsis of 50 years. It is incredible that it's 50 years. And we are very proud of the work that we've done and looking forward to, what's to come in the future, especially with these new projects Chris has mentioned. And certainly our circuit rider program has been really flourishing the past few years and growing with our team. We have some of our circuit riders on the call with us. Brad Scheid is the original circuit rider, and Stacy Varro is here, and Stefan Danchuk, and our fellow, Andrea Florsheimer. So Brad, I asked you to join the call since you have the long history of our circuit rider team. Somebody had posed a question in the registration form. What was the biggest success that you can recall over the years here as a circuit rider?
Well, I can't say it's the biggest success for the organization, but certainly personally, one of the, first, I guess we call it saves, was in Manchester. It was the Salvation Army this was on Main Street in Manchester. There was a big announcement by the town and by the Salvation Army. They're going to tear the whole thing down and build new. Chris talked a lot about we had money. We didn't have any money when I started. So what we ended up doing is using our board members, who a lot of times are professionals themselves. Anyway, with an architect on the board, we met with the Salvation Army, went through some scenario, tried to address what their concerns were. And we went through a whole, nothing really major for the architect, but just a series of sketches and drawings trying to help them understand that, hey, maybe you could save this building. And lo and behold, they did. And the town jumped in as well. And we had this kind of almost went from one thing to another. It was like almost a glorious revelation that they were going to rehab this. I should also say it was really, I can't remember, it was the only time where we actually went back to the town, went back to the Salvation Army, thanking them for actually saving this beautiful, the building's still there today. It's beautiful, it's functional, and you know, certainly personally, I'm not saying that's the biggest thing we ever did, but it was certainly personal, but it was also trying to use the circuit rider program, in this case, using board members, using architects to kind of bring in real technical advice. And then we did have some money to use to actually hire these people, but in the beginning we were pretty much using them and not paying them. So, but I think the circuit rider program was a marked difference. Chris didn't go through that, but it was Connecticut Trust was mainly kind of an office based. They certainly did some things in the field, but it wasn't until the circuit rider program that we actually went out in the field, met with people constantly, as opposed to just sporadically. So anyway, yeah, and the rest is history. You know, we've done a lot of visits and a lot of changes.
Yeah, and Chris also mentioned the several iterations of the revolving loan fund program. We are sort of winding down the structure that we have now. We still have, you know, a grant or a loan out to help preserve the Reed and Hughes buildings in Norwich. So once that loan closes out, I think this iteration of the revolving loan program will be closed. But there was movement a couple of years ago at the state to talk about the need for a revolving loan fund program, and a working group was put together. So, you know, there is still, maybe it'll come back if the state can provide some funding for it once again. We'll see if we can crack the nut on how to get that program to work. It's really difficult in Connecticut with real estate prices to actually make that fund revolve, but it could be a very, you know, important tool for us to have in our toolbox.
Well, the other thing, if we had money, I'll just jump in one last time. And other people want to talk, but the Vibrant Community Initiative was something we created based on a lot of state money they threw at us. But I do think that the role of Preservation Connecticut working with local municipalities to solve historic issues, and we solved a bunch of them. We had a lot of money. The problem is that money is no longer available, so we haven't been able to do it. But what we did is we hired a team of professionals, and those and the municipalities competed for the money. But we actually they told us what difficulty they had, what obstacle they had with an historic building, and we were able to form this team. And through this team, actually, produce some results from that. We did a number of them, but the state, Jane, if the state would fund that again, I think it would go a long way for us to have more of a visibility in the municipalities, you know. But it's all about the money, right?
Yeah. Two comments. One is that one thing that the circuit riders have done is work with grant applicants to shape projects. A lot of grants, they hand you the application form and say, fill this out and get back to us. And the circuit riders really, work with folks, help them to create outline a realistic scope of work, to understand maybe, you're talking about you want to repaint your house, but you need to shore up the foundation first, kind of thing. Set the right priorities. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the Connecticut Trust was established to really leverage private funding for historic preservation. And that from the very beginning has been much more difficult than the founders realized. And we've been much more reliant on government funding through grants from the State Historic Preservation Office, through the Community Investment Act, which gives us an annual appropriation as well. But we've continued to be much more reliant on government funding than was originally intended. And so that's still a growing area for us, is trying to figure out, there's a lot of money in Connecticut, how can we get more of that to work for preserving these special places?
Well, there's a lot of friends and partners on the call today. If anyone would like to share a story or ask a question, we'd love to hear from you. We've been really enjoying the last few months of, sitting back and reflecting on our 50-year history. We had a nice celebration at the Legislative Office Building to kick off the year, and we've been doing some little celebrations along the way. This talk today was a nice way to sort of encapsulate the history in a program that'll be in our YouTube library for posterity to reflect on our history. Susan Barlow, Coach Ariema is donating. Huh, do you know him? Would love to make that connection with Coach Ariema. But certainly, yes, if you have any suggestions of corporate, connections, foundations, individuals, we are always open to make a site visit, chat with anyone who would be a supporter of preservation. It's people are very excited when they hear about our work, and we are able to meet with them in the field and show them how we are actively involved in communities. So I would welcome any help in the fundraising category, and certainly your memberships and your donations are tremendously helpful as well.
Yeah, so if the question, what project felt like a large success? I mean, Brad mentions the Manchester Salvation Army, which may not have exactly qualified as a big success, but it was important because it really got the Circuit Rider project going well. I would say the Merritt Parkway has been something that we've been involved with, as I said, for many years. It started off right around 1990, when the Department of Transportation was talking about a plan to widen the parkway, which would have certainly wiped out its landscape and probably most, if not all, of the bridges as well. We joined with other activists from Fairfield County and all around, really opposing that. As I said, Connecticut Trust got a grant to prepare a National Register nomination for the parkway. And the Department of Transportation listened to all of us and decided not to widen the parkway, embarked on a series of projects, one segment at a time, to make some safety improvements, to do some landscape restoration, to restore bridges. And as I said, they've been working on that segment at a time for 30 years now, and they're currently on the last segment. So it's been a long-going project. It's one that certainly had a big effect, but it's an ongoing project. It's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. Having done all these segmental renovation projects, they just about have to go back and start over now after some of them are 30 years old. They're also revisiting their guidelines and management practices for caring for the landscape, for keeping it from being overgrown, for keeping keeping in safety projects, reworking the intersection with Route 7 in Norwalk, trying to undo some of the damage to the landscape that was done when routes 8 and 25 were put in. So that's been really satisfying and a big commitment of, I say, 30 years of our time.
Yeah, and Jane, yeah, that is really a major achievement of us. But I think another was the state historic tax credit. We actually worked with SHPO on some of that. We did a lot of lobbying as well. We testified. You say, well, what's the big deal? Well, the state historic credit, there was already, and I'm not talking so much about the homeowners, although the homeowner credit did come into effect. I'm mostly talking about multifamily buildings that were derelict and needed rehab, which has always been my focus. The federal historic credit was always there, but what we were able to do is do a companion state historic credit. So if you qualified for the federal historic, you could also qualify for the state historic credit. And when you paired those two together, it sometimes made the difference between rehabbing and not rehabbing. Was that a circuit rider program? Not really. But what we ended up doing was certainly being out in the communities, and we did, work really hard with SHPO on that, saying what the need was. And that, of course, led to also the historic homes program too, which, while we were trying to focus on more homeowners as well. And I think the record shows there's been a lot of historic rehabs done since that state historic credit has passed. So, and it's been fine-tuned and tweaked, but I think that was like a really monumental thing. It also gave the circuit rider programs something more to talk about when we meet with owners. So I think it really was a game changer for a lot, and I think it has. Not everybody, it's not for everybody, but I think we did, get a lot of buildings rehabbed and hopefully continue to do so.
Right, and I would just add that the other big program, if you want to call it a program, over the last few decades has been our ability to work with the State Historic Preservation Office and the Attorney General to intervene when there's a demolition of a historic property that can't be avoided. It's always our first intention to work with property owners, work with the community, bring these incentives into play. But sometimes we do find ourselves having to step in and try to protect a property that's listed on the National Register for Historic Places. And through the Connecticut Environmental Protection Act, we've been able to pursue that path several times with success.
That's included houses in Wallingford and Southington, a couple downtown buildings in New London, the building part of Norwalk Inn in Norwalk. These didn't always go to trial, but just the having that law that allows citizens to sue to prevent unreasonable demolition has been a bargaining chip that we've used, and the Attorney General's office has been a good partner, and the State Historic Preservation Office in working on some of those.
Yeah, and I live in Wallingford, and I'm right down the street or up the street from a building that the town wanted to demolish. I don't know, what year was that, Chris? I can't even remember. It was long before my involvement. It's rehab now. It's right next to the city hall, and they were going to tear it down for parking. But we used this Connecticut Environmental Protection Act. We dogged it to the end, and eventually a homeowner did buy that place. And today it is I see her out on the porch. I walk down the street, she's sitting out on the porch, and she's right on the parade ground, right on the corner there. And you know, I've talked to her. Went into the house long ago. She loves it. So there was an example that building, could have been basically a parking lot, and it would have faced Main Street, and it would have been really a hole in Main Street. And again, it wasn't just Preservation Connecticut, it was also State Historic Preservation Office, the Attorney General's office, and eventually the town. The town ended up going along. They were very opposed, but they ended up going with it. So the first option sometimes is not the best.
Yep, in those cases, I'll rely on a groundswell of community support.
A lot of support.
We
Correct.
react to what the locals want to preserve, and when they demand an intervention of that nature, that's where Preservation Connecticut can really step in and help. Well, it's been really nice reflecting on all of these great programs and the growth of the organization. Thanks to everyone for stopping in to celebrate with us. Again, we're really pleased that this is our 50th anniversary, and we're looking forward to a lot of good work in the future. And thanks to all of you for being wonderful members and partners and always supporting us and using our services when you need to. We're really glad to have you as part of our community. And thank you, Chris. Wonderful
Thanks.
presentation. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.